So who of you has been waking up this morning? Can't remember? Well, anyway, I want you to imagine that you wake up in a nice spring morning. Eyes still closed. First thoughts are forming in your head. And you're thinking, today I need a new opinion. Today I want to be convinced. Can you imagine that? No, because that's crap, right? Nobody wants to be convinced. But everybody wants to be convincing. Isn't that something wrong here? I mean, mercy is a virtue because you want to give mercy and you want to receive mercy. But being convincing? We talk about moving people, right? Move them. So who is an expert in the moving business? How about the freight industry? I mean, and if you work in the freight industry, you know that on a way bill, on a freight document, I mean, it's worthless if it only keeps the destination. It also needs the origin. So if we want to move people, we first have to know where they are today. Otherwise, it's ridiculous. I mean, I know every one of you has a complex topic to talk about, right? And maybe you're thinking you have to fill up your competence with content. But I learned that wrong. I learned that years ago when I was not a young trainer, but fresh in the training business. It was in a town called Hamburg. Hamburg-Horn. Maybe some of my German colleagues know that one. It's an NH hotel, and the window front from the seminar area, you will look directly to a turf, to a horse race. And we spent the first half of the first day and went to lunch. And during lunch, there was discussion about horse riding, special kind of horse riding, which is cross-country. And one of the people attending the training, a young lady, she was having, high aims, high goals to be professional in doing that kind of sport. And I returned to the seminar room early to prepare myself for the second half. And I was sitting there, looking out of the window, facing the turf, seeing her, and my synapses kind of connected. And it was like 10 minutes to go for the beginning of the seminar, so no one but her was in the room, and people slowly strolling in. And we started to talk about cross-country riding. And you have to know, I have no idea about that kind of sport. I mean, I don't like horses. But we kind of talked. I mean, I know the concept of riding, sure. But I'm not an expert. And we talked. And while we talked, the room filled. And when it was time to begin with the second part of the training, I said, thank you for that discussion. And faced the rest of the crowd and wanted to start. And she says, well, thank you also. This was kind of an expert talk. And then, like now, a few people kind of raised head and laughed. And she says, why are you laughing? And a gentleman in the other corner says, well, young lady, the only one who was talking were you. So that was when I learned that you can contribute to a discussion on expert level without saying anything. Just because you intended to understand and to listen. Isn't that crazy? There's a colleague of us, you may know him, Anthony Perinello. He's in the States in California. He speaks and writes about sales. And he shared a story of his life in one of his books, saying that after school he went to Navy, and being at Navy, he was standing too close to the cannon a few times. So he is more or less deaf. That's ideal preconditions to become a salesman, right? No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm serious. Because, I mean, he had to have his sales conversations like that, right? Totally focused, because otherwise he couldn't understand a word. No noticing during the talk, no looking around, no like that. All the time. And that was because he was, I mean, Anthony Perinello, right? Italian, stallion, macho. No way he would use a hearing aid like that, right? But technology emerges, and today these hearing aids are so small, you don't see them. He got one of those. And it happened that he met one of his elder customers, and after 10 minutes in the talk, the customer says, "Hey, Tony, you're not listening." And he says, "Well, if you would know how much I listen now." And he told the story about the hearing aid. And the customer says, "What do you think what the customer says? Can you please take out the hearing aid?" It was so fun, so nice to have someone who really want to listen. Isn't that crazy? So maybe it's not only not contributing content increases the value of a conversation, maybe also your intention, your kind of attitude that is in your body language if you listen to someone. And there's another idea. I mean, imagine you got a problem with your hip, right? And it's really hurting. And there's, let's say, in Antwerp, there's a doctor who is worldwide the best doctor for your hip. You heard that. No way to get a date there for the next 2 years. No way. But by chance, one of your speaker colleagues went to school with that guy, so he arranged an appointment for you tomorrow. So you're not an orthopedic medicine, right? But you believe in his expertise. So you go there, you wait for a few minutes, and then you call to the doctors, and you go there, you open the door, and you walk in because it's hurting a little bit like that, right? You're walking in, and after your third step, that doctor says, "Stop. I know what you have." And he writes the recipe and gives it to you and says, "You can pick it up at the counter front. Goodbye." What would you think? What do you think? He's completely nuts, right? I mean, he's not an expert. He's nuts, right? And you can't judge that because you're not a doctor, but you will think that. Why? What would change if you walk in there and he already writes the recipe and asks you to take a seat and will check you for 5 minutes, asking you questions, and then hand you over the recipe? What would you think then? You would think it's a genius. So maybe the quality of our expertise is not because of what we contribute, but because of what kind of questions we ask. So maybe we can increase our status of expertise if we ask the right questions and not talk the talk. Maybe that's a concept. I mean, we all use terms, right? I mean, a lot of terms in our speeches and when we talk to our customers. Let me pick one term. Have you ever heard about a CRM system? Right? You know what it is? When I work with a bunch of salespeople that sell CRM systems, I make a joke. I ask them to take a piece of paper and write down the definition of CRM system in less than 30 words. And if there are 12 people in the room, we will get 11 definitions. So we have to face the fact, as soon as we use a term, we lose control about the thinking of our audience. Because chances are that definitions of terms are different. And not only technical terms. I About 10 years ago, there was a TV commercial you may know from Mercedes-Benz. You saw two young guys sitting in a Mercedes-Benz, driving through the woods, winding road, quite sporty, quite fast, German car, right? Cut, you see workers trying to remove a tree which has fallen on the road. Cut, you see them again driving pretty fast, two people, two young guys. And then you see the car approaching that tree very fast, braking, squeaking, stopping like that in front of the tree. And as it stops, the guy next to the driver cries, "Brake!" Text, the new car with the braking assistance brakes faster than you even can think. I thought, great, I want that. I want that car with that braking assistant, right? So I bought it. And then I learned a lot. I learned that the braking assistant also, in combination with a rain sensor, will dry your brakes during rain. So when it rains, it will from time to time, very, very slowly and slightly hit the brakes on the discs to make it dry. And if you drive on a German Autobahn pretty fast, and you remove your foot from the accelerator, it will start touching the brake pads and the discs to make you brake faster when you need it. After a year, I learned, with my mileage, that means 4 times a year new pads and twice discs, right? And that's pretty expensive. So my definition of braking assistant changed dramatically. So when I dropped that car and went to the BMW dealer and asked that young sales guy, "Do you have a braking assistant?" And he said, "Yes, of course." He might be very distracted when I just turn around and leave. Because braking assistant meant something completely different to me than to him. So when we use terms, we give up control of what we're talking about. And this increases when we consider emotions. Let me use a very simple term. You all know, maybe since you've been 2. Dog. You know dog? Heard about that one? Yeah. And I'm sure not only completely different dogs came into your mind, maybe different feelings about dogs came in your mind. I mean, I know people that love dogs. I know people that hate dogs. I know people that maybe have lost a good friend lately, kind of sad. And others of you might have chosen to have a new baby puppy and you're ready to go home and clean up the mess. So, as soon as we use terms, we use control because we can't control the emotions connected to that terms. Have you ever heard about scroll? S-K-R-O-O-L, scroll? No? Well, let me tell you, it's a knife. It's a knife that is used to remove skin off deer in hunting, okay? To cut off the skin of the deer in Scandinavia. So now it depends how much you like to remove skin off deer, right? How much you love to cut skin off animals. Because if you do, you might have a positive kind of feeling around scroll, and if you don't, you may not. By the way, I made it up. There's no word like scroll. But let me show you that if you use a term, whatever term it might be, you're losing control. So maybe we should think about that concept in selling, especially if we want to sell our ideas, concepts, speeches, trainings, whatever you sell. Because we want to make the customer decision about us. And if we give up control about his thinking, maybe we'll lose control about his decision. There's one guy who is into linguistic. Let's call him Daniel. Daniel Everett. Have you heard about him? And this guy did something very brave, very brave. He took his wife and his 3 small children and he moved to a place far away because he thought that would be the meaning of his life. With all the courage you can have, he moved his family to a place at Amazonas River, 2 flying hours away from the next civilization point. And they lived in a tribe called Pitahan to fulfill his mission. And his mission was to translate the Bible into their language. We didn't know enough about their language to translate the Bible, the Holy Word, into their language. So he went there and lived there for years to understand their language. And he learned a lot. For example, he learned they don't have terms for colors. Simply none. They would say like blood or like coal to describe colors. They don't have numbers in their language, so they can't count. It's impossible for them to count. They can't. And they have no future and no past in their language. So they can only talk about now. There's no way to talk about future, no way to talk about past. Isn't that funny? And he found out that, therefore, they thought completely different. They were not interested in the past. They were not interested in the future. They're only living now. So when he started to understand that language good enough, one of the chiefs approached him and said, you know, Daniel, this Jesus you're talking about, do you know him? And he has to say, well, no, because he's dead for a time, but we know exactly everything about his life because people living with him write it down. And the chief says, well, do you know one of these people who knew him? And he has to say, no. So the chief says, Daniel, you know what? You can stay, but please leave us alone with your Jesus. And at this very moment, he changed his life. He stopped being a missionary and started to become an explorer. And maybe we should do the same. Maybe we should stop being a missionary a little bit and start being an explorer even more. Start exploring the minds of the people we want to talk to, maybe the minds of the people we want to convince, and try to invite them to a journey. Or at least explore their perspective. Because, you know, missionaries will be tied to the cross sent down the river. Explorers are welcome. I mean, in a speech like that, you might kind of looking for tools, right? So I got a few tools for you. Let me share a story about real life with you. I mean, I'm in sales trainings, basically, for people who are selling complex stuff. So there is one company, I'm going to share the name with you, they call themselves Lufthansa Systems. They're a big system house, they're in IT, and they're selling IT systems to airlines, not only Lufthansa, but worldwide. And they asked me to develop a concept for them. And they thought what they want would be, let's call it value selling 2.0. So the next step after value selling. And I talked to them, and it turns out that they have no idea what they want. So what do you do then? You may have a kind of a workshop, right? With the decision makers to kind of work out what they really want. And we did that. And they promised the decision maker would be in that workshop. And truth was, there were only semiconductors from HR and sales. So people who are kind of in between leaders. And, well, we spent a nice day. We painted flip charts. And if there would be a prize for a photo protocol, we would have earned it that day. It was wonderful. And they were happy. And they say, well, that's exactly what we want. Thank you for working that out. Can you please give us a business proposal? And at that moment, I did something you might not understand now. But I said, well, I can't. Because of quality issues. Because we found out if I would give you a business proposal prior to talking to the decision maker, this would decrease quality of this project. So I would love to give you a proposal, but only after I talked to a guy, I already knew his name, Gero von Götz. So will you help me to have a 10-minute telephone conversation with him, or may I go for my own? And they said something like, are you crazy? You're not going to make us a proposal? And I said, I would love to, but I can't. So I talked to that guy on the telephone. And I said, thank you, Mr. von Götz, that you spent like 10 minutes. All the details have been discussed with your people, but there's one question left on the table. For what reason do you plan to send 150 people to a sales training? What's in it for you? And he said something after a short while, because he had to think about it. And he said, well, we have to increase our boardroom competence. You know what that is? I have no idea. Really no idea. So I said, well, that sounds like a very interesting term. What exactly do you mean? I mean, what is it? Boardroom competence. And he says, well, our people are either coming from the flying staff, and therefore they're well-trained in social habits and they kind of work with everybody. Or the other half is maybe from technical careers, and they are loved because of their expertise, but both are not very good in connecting to the people on the boardroom level, on the C level, at the CEO level. So what we need is more contacts here, more understanding here, because so often airlines change their strategy, we're sooner out than we're in. So that's what it was, maybe 5 minutes, right? Now, question about my business proposal. What do you think would be the title of my business proposal? A, value selling 2.0, or B, boardroom level competence training? And yeah, you're right, it's boardroom level competence training. And I got the deal. And you know why? Well, I know, and I think it's obvious, I know that I'm Germany's, Europe's, and sorry, Ron, the world's best sales trainer. I know that. But my customers sometimes don't have the intellectual capacity to, you know? So I have to help them. I have to help them translate my features into their benefits. And that's my job. That's my job, being a communicator in the sales business or in the convincing business, or however you want to call that. It's our job to translate whatever we want to be into the perspective of the ones who should make the decision. So when you try to sell yourself, maybe you want to stop contributing a lot of stuff. Maybe you want to think about your body language when you're listening. And maybe you want to stop using terms, crazy terms, maybe terms you invented. You know, I invented a term, it's called vision selling. I like it. You have to kill your darlings when you talk to your customers. And you have to be really interested in the way they think. Let me give you another tool. Who of you is using a car when you go to the customer sometimes? Using a car? Okay, then I got a perfect tool for you. It looks like this. Imagine when you park the car at your customers, you will fix that on the rear mirror, right? So everyone could see what's going on, speaker at work, right? What you don't know, on the back of these cards are 3 pretty nasty questions. That's why you leave the car, let the card hanging. And you go to your customer. And you drink the coffee, and you eat the cookies, and you speak. And talk about maybe your next presentation. And then, when you think you're ready, you're ready to return to the car. But from now on, you remember there are these 3 questions. And you know, if you return to the car without being able to answer these 3 questions better than before the meeting, you're in trouble. You're really in trouble. So you stay there and you make sure you understand enough from the customer's perspective to answer these 3 questions. You want to know? Yes, you know. Why me? Why now? Why anyway? Right? You have to find out, why should they do a deal with you? And why now and not next year? And why anyway? Why should they change anything of their current behavior at the moment? Why should they? You want this one? Who wants it? I got like 50 of it, so later on you can. I developed a tool, and if you want, I can share that with you later on. I developed a tool. Let's imagine we talk about vacation in Europe. And, well, there's a lot of possibilities we could talk about, right? Different countries, different cities. So in front of me is a map of Europe, kind of abstract. So while we talk about vacation in Europe, I make my notes into the fields of the countries. So when we talk about Italy, I will make my notes in the boot. And we talk about, I don't know, the Netherlands, I will put it into the Netherlands area. And always, when I look on this piece of paper, it will respond to me with empty areas which we haven't covered. So if you kind of translate that idea to a business talk, why don't you make a map of what you want to talk about? Fields on a piece of paper, you want to make your notes. Like, I would do that, and I can share that with you if you want. Just approach me after that speech. Like, I want to know, what is your problem at the moment in sales? And what are your expectations, let's say, 1 year from now? And what are you selling? What is the customer getting out of it? How are you going to... Stuff like that. I know my map, and it's on a piece of paper. And what I do is I develop together with my customers these kind of maps so they don't forget stuff. And this, I think, is very close to a checklist, right, Peter? And a checklist is very helpful if you don't want to land without the gears open, right? And nobody would accept a flight captain saying, come on, I made like 2,000 clean landings. Now once I forgot to, right? It's not acceptable. And on the other hand, it's not acceptable that we do discussions in a sales situation and forget stuff we shouldn't forget. So why don't we use something like that? Why don't we use something like a checklist to make sure we don't forget stuff and use it in a way that really helps us to concentrate on what's really important in a customer situation, and that's his perspective. We all will get distracted by the stuff that's in our heads. And who wouldn't be starting to talk when the customer says, well, what have you brought with you today? Come on, convince me. And that's a trap. Because we're not going to win anything when we talk like 20 minutes in front of the customer. It's not going to work. it's really not going to work. When my daughter was like 3 years old, and today she's grown up. Or she thinks she's grown up. And she wanted to go to a zoo for the, I don't know, 4th millionth time or something, right? And I didn't want to. I'm a salesperson. So I tried to sell her, tried to convince her of something completely different. And while convincing her, in the middle of convincing her, she started to cry. And she says, Daddy, convincing is forcing. Convincing, you're forcing me. And she's right. Because when I enter a conversation with the plan to convince you, my attitude will be, I'm smart. You're not. Now. And I'm working on making you smart too. And this is not very friendly. This is not very friendly. And maybe you haven't experienced that your customers start to cry when you do that. But believe me, they will use another childish reaction, which is more in the rabble area, right? Like kicking you. It's such a simple concept. It's such a simple concept that we have 2 ears and only 1 mouth, and you heard all of that. So I really question myself, why is it that we forget that in a convincing situation? Why do we forget that really no one wants to be convinced? Really no one is waiting for your text. Really no one wants to know what you know. Everyone only wants to talk about what they think is important. I cannot raise your interest in, well, let's say, fly fishing, right? Either you are interested in fly fishing or you're not, right? So what can I do if I want to sell fly fishing? I have to think about my product. And I have to find, not raise, find interest at you that I can connect to fly fishing, right? So when I talk to you about that sport, I would maybe talk to you about a hobby that is very relaxing and on the same time very cheap, not very expensive. Or maybe we'll talk about a hobby that is out there in the outside, but also has something to do for you at home when you work on that flies. And when I talk to you about that, I will listen closely, like Tony, and find out if your eyes start to sparkle at some moment. And then I will connect that to my product. So if we want to sell our speeches, our trainings, or whatever, our projects, why don't we start to seek interest and to find what they are interested in and connect that to whatever we want to convince them. And that's going to do the job dramatically. That's going to be a real difference. Maybe you think, well, that's only half of it, and of course I have to talk. And you're right. I mean, if you say nothing, it's not going to work. But I'm not worried about that. Really not. Because, I know you can't hold it. You're speakers. You will do it. But maybe you want to take that advice. Shut up and get the deal. Thanks. Thank you.